Hey everybody, Andy Hamilton of Track Wrestling here, joined by one of the nation's top sports writers, Joe Posnanski. Joe is the author of two of my all-time favorite wrestling pieces, both of which were written about Rulon Gardner. Welcome in, Joe. Thanks for taking the time.
Great to be here.
Well, we want to talk about September 25th, 2000, which you at one point had called your greatest day in sports writing, and you've seen everything under the sun. Tiger winning the Masters, Jeter hitting a walk-off in the World Series, Rams winning the Super Bowl on a tackle at the 1-yard line. Many more things since then. But I guess first of all, is that still your greatest day in sports writing?
Yeah, it really is, which is incredible. I mean, I've been very fortunate, and I've been to many Super Bowls and World Series and Masters and British Opens and World Cups and everything else, and a bunch of Olympics as well. And there's something about that day, something about that event was just very, very special. It was incredible to see. The surrounding for me was just very, it was odd and fortunate and very, very cool. So, yeah, I mean, I still like when I give speeches and all that, I still talk about that day. It represents a lot to me.
Of course, that was the day that Rulon Gardner knocked off 12-time world and Olympic champion Alexander Karelin. He finished his career 887-2. Up to that point, he'd gone 6 years without giving up a single point. Of course, you knew, to what you wrote, you knew nothing about Karelin going into this, correct?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I knew nothing about Karelin. I knew nothing about Greco-Roman wrestling. I knew nothing about really anything. And it was very much for me a last-second decision, because the same night that Rulon Gardner and Alexander Karelin wrestled was the night that the U.S. baseball team was playing for the gold medal, which is where just about every American sports writer went, including most of my friends. And I didn't want to do that. That was for me, I'm a baseball writer. I would say most of the writing I've done has been baseball. But something about baseball at the Olympics doesn't feel right to me. It's not the pinnacle of the sport, which is what I love about the Olympics. And honestly, I can tell you, I did not know who Rulon Gardner was, did not know he was the one wrestling. I'd heard people talking about Karelin, and I looked up some of the things that you just said, him not giving up a point in 6 years, his incredible record, the fact that they were giving him a special Olympic gold, like in addition to the regular Olympic gold, they were going to give him a special medal that night. And then I started reading about how he trained and carrying refrigerators upstairs and all these other crazy things. And I thought, what a great story. So I went specifically to write about Karelin, and then of course the night turned upside down.
At what point did you realize you're onto something big here?
First of all, it was bigger than I thought when I got there. I mean, we're so used to in the United States, where wrestling is as an Olympic sport, and we think about it every 4 years, and it's not this phenomenon that it is at the Olympics. And so when I got there and saw there was a full house and there were scalpers outside, I mean, it was a truly magnetic event even before it started. So when I got there, I thought, well, this is a big deal. And I think back on it, I might have known he was wrestling an American. I probably did, but I certainly didn't know anything about Rulon Gardner and didn't know anything. I did not know his name. And I went to go see this, and I see the crowd and everything going crazy. And the match went on for quite a while, scoreless. And I didn't know enough about Greco-Roman wrestling to understand what that meant. I mean, I didn't know if that's the way it normally was or what. So the moment I realized something crazy was happening was when Rulon Gardner scored his point. And the crowd, I'll always remember that hush and that sort of gasp in the crowd when he scored the point. And I thought, wow, something weird is happening here. I still didn't think he was gonna win. And I still didn't think it was gonna be this big upset and maybe the greatest upset in Olympic history. And I certainly didn't see what was coming in the future. But yeah, at that moment, I thought, well, okay, maybe I'm seeing something not just cool, which I always thought it was going to be, but something, maybe unique in my life.
What do you remember about the moments when Karelin put his head down, reached his hand out, and the match is coming to an end?
That's the moment that stands out for me because, not knowing really very much or anything at the time about Greco-Roman wrestling, I didn't really know how he scored the point, for instance. I didn't know how any of this had happened. I didn't know the strategies. I wasn't entirely sure because I saw the clock coming down, but I wasn't entirely sure that was going to be the end of the match. I didn't know if there was going to be another period or whatever. And when I saw him sort of bow his head and reach out his hand in defeat, man, my whole body was just like goosebumps. I mean, it was that's that to me is why I love that event so much, because it's the power of sport there. I don't even understand all the rules or anything, but the way the crowd responded and the way that this great champion stepping down and this young upstart defeating him. I mean, that's the essence of sport, right? And so suddenly I'm watching that, and that is the moment I think about all the time when I think back to that event. I can't remember almost any of the action. I've never seen the match. I haven't seen the match since then, but in my mind, I can close my eyes and I can see him bowing his head and holding out his hand and in defeat. And that incredible, just incredible.
20 years later, what do you remember about the post-match press conference?
I remember a lot about it because it was just such a strange thing. There were not many Americans there. I was there. One of my best friends, Chuck Culpepper, was there. And in fact, we had gone to the match together, and we thought, well, this is going to be crazy. What did we just see? We were asking each other, like, what does this mean? What do we see here? And then we went into the press conference, and I very distinctly remember Rulon Gardner stepping up to the stage, where they had the press conference, and turning to the guy who was running the press conference from the Olympic Committee and saying, "I've never been in a press conference before." And I whether that was true or not, I don't know, but that was when I thought, what in the world is happening here? And he starts telling these stories about being a dairy farmer and wrestling cows, and it's the whole thing just felt like it dropped into this crazy surreal dream, and it just kept going like that. It just, the press conference happened, and he says all these amazing, wonderful things. And then as we're walking out, we run straight into his mother, who tells us incredible, wonderful things about, I remember her telling us that where they lived was also where Wilford Brimley lived, the actor. But she didn't say that. She's like, the oatmeal guy. And so we're walking around thinking about the oatmeal guy, and then it just kept going and going. All of these wonderful stories. I called the radio station in Afton, and the guy, had to put me on hold because it was a one-person radio station, and he was on the air, and he had I know he was going to read all the birthdays in town, and he decided he couldn't do that because this was such a big event. And it was just beautiful and Americana and wonderful, and Rulon's charisma just poured through. I mean, he was just so lovable and interesting, and it was so great to and you see that up against this incredible champion, and this sort of one-time possibility of an upset like that. It's unforgettable.
The amount of storylines packed into this one story, you described it as like being in a chocolate factory and having to eat your way out.
Yeah, it was crazy. I wrote a piece that got a lot years later, that got a lot of widespread thing, which is absolutely true. So I'm writing it, and I couldn't write. I eventually wrote the column. I think you mentioned it. I eventually wrote the column with a whole bunch of different leads, like this is how I could start the story, or this is how I could start the story, because I couldn't come up with one way to tell that story. There were so many amazing things that were happening in it, but it was too much as a writer, and I was overwhelmed. Everybody was, trying to write about this. Uh, and it was overwhelming in a different way. I mean, it was overwhelming certainly to write about Derek Jeter hitting, the World Series game-winning home run, so close to ground zero right after 9/11. That was overwhelming, but it was overwhelming because you felt the sort of sadness and joy of the moment mixing in and trying to find all that. This was overwhelming because there were just 25 different ways to tell the story. There were just so many different angles. And I remember I'm sitting there and I'm trying in my mind to get all this squared away. And this man walks up to me and he says, "Excuse me, do you know where the Gardner party is?" And I said, I don't know. And he goes, "Well, I'm Rulon's father." And I was like, just get away from me. I didn't want anymore. I was I already had too much. And he says, "I'm just so glad we could make it and be here to see this." And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, we really didn't have the money to come." And I said, "Is that right?" And he goes, "Yeah, we had to raise the money. And what we did was we went to the Wyoming State Fair and we sold my world famous stew." And I just thought, and that was the way I titled the piece, I didn't need that stew. I don't have room for that stew in my story. I don't have any space, any bandwidth left for this thing. It was, I'll never have a story like that again, like quite like that, which, where it was so surprising and so cool and such a wonderful celebration of the sport. But at the same time, it was also Wyoming and cows and stews and little town radio stations. It was so much. And what a joy. What an absolute joy.
How did you figure out the way to navigate through this story? You mentioned you write all these like leads to the story instead of lead in body and conclusion. Right. And have you ever written a story like that before? Have you ever tried that before? And if not, how did you come to the conclusion on that one?
No, I've never done that before, and I don't believe I've ever done that since. How did I come up with it? I really truly think it was after Mr. Gardner came over, and I was talking with Chuck and other people that were there, just like I don't know what to say. I just we're just kind of at a loss. And we had time. The one thing that I had was time because it was in Sydney, so we had a big time difference. So I had a lot of time to write it, and I just kept going around and around. How do I do this? How do I do this? And I tried other ways. I mean, I wrote it. I don't remember what routes I took, but I remember trying to write it more directly. Try to pick one angle and work off of it, but then I just was leaving so much out. So that's when I decided I was going to write the story. Like I said, well, I could tell it this way, and then I would tell like the first part of it, and then I say, oh, you know what, let me tell it this way, and then I would tell a different part of it, and no, let me tell it this way. And I honestly didn't know that it worked. When you write it, you just sort of like you're trying anything. And I sent it in, and I got a call from my editor saying, this is great. I love this. And I thought, man, that's great, because the worst thing in the world I could imagine doing was seeing something that awesome and then writing like a stinker of a column that just didn't capture the emotion or the moment at all. So, so it really kind of came to me, but it wasn't that hard to figure out, because I had a list in front of me of all the different things that I needed to get into the story. And I thought there's no way to do it unless I just write about each of these things individually.
What do you remember about congregating with your colleagues or counterparts later that night after they'd gone to baseball, and the conversations maybe you had with them?
Yeah, there were a few who, were kind of cursing at me and Chuck, because they missed it. I mean, the U.S. won the gold medal in baseball. I mean, it was kind of a cool story, but they missed it. The great thing that wrestling did was they brought Rulon over to the baseball site afterward. Not a lot of people know that. So a lot of people wrote it. They didn't see it. They wrote it, live, based on the replays, and also hearing from Rulon, which was so wonderful that a lot of them wrote amazing stories from it, and you would think they were there. But yeah, more than a few were like, yeah, you lucky. How did you guys, because it was really counterintuitive to go to write. Cause we were going to write about a great, but also a Russian wrestler at a time when the U.S. was going to win its first baseball gold medal in a long time. So we went the other way, and this one just happened to work out.
Have you crossed paths with Rulon since?
Yes, I have. A few years ago, when Rulon was on The Biggest Loser, I went to go see him and write about him. And I actually ended up, I was working for NBC at the time, and so I got to go in to The Biggest Loser set and spend quite a bit of time with him. And he'd been through a lot by then. I mean, I think we all know. We're all excited, I think, about the documentary that's going to come out on NBC. They interviewed me for that, which was very cool. And we all know that Rulon's been through a lot of different things. By that point, Rulon had hit bottom. It's why he was on The Biggest Loser. I mean, he'd gained all that weight, and he'd had some financial difficulties and all this. But I still found him to be so utterly charming and thoughtful, and just a decent guy, he did not know when we first started talking. He didn't know that I was there. I mean, I'm sure everybody tells him they were there, right? But so I really truly, I don't know this, but I don't think there were even 5 American writers there. I can think of 3 that were there. It was a very, very small number. And for Rulon to, I got to tell him I was there, told him how much it meant to me, how cool I thought it was, which he loved. And then he really opened up about his life and, how he was trying to, I think that's the cool thing about Rulon, is that he's always trying, I think, to get it together. It's never been easy for him. It wasn't easy for him leading up to the Olympics. It wasn't easy for him dealing with all of the fame that came out of the Olympics, then going back, and then of course the various mishaps that have happened to him through the years. I think it's always been tough, but I really like him, and it was very cool to spend that kind of time with him. That's been a few years now. I've not seen him since then, but it was I think he's a true American original, and I think an incredibly interesting and cool guy.
Well, hey, Joe, thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciate you taking the time to join us and look back on the amazing story that you witnessed in Sydney.
Thanks. Yeah, I can talk about it all day. It was once in a lifetime for sure.